So our strategy is one sentence, and it's very simple. So if you remember anything from what I'm saying which is helpful. It will be new markets, new media, consumer insight, and somewhat ugly word, horizontality. Right? And I'll try and explain quickly what each of the four things are. So new markets is very simple. We're a $16 billion company, or we were last year. If you include those companies that we own 20 to 49% of, we're 19 billion last year. This year will be 17 billion according to market expectations, and will be about 20 billion, including those associates, as we call them, those companies we own 30 to 49%. So when I talk about numbers, I'm talking about the 19 including associates, because it gives you a better idea of the geographical functional spread of the business. So look at new markets. Today, about 30% of our revenues, so 30% of those 19, come from fast-growing markets. I don't call them emerging markets, it's offensive. Some of you may come from Brazil, may come from Brazil, Russia, India, or China. Interesting. Okay. Anybody from the next 11? If you know, Iran is included in the next 11. Doubt that Iranian will be in the room, if possible. Anybody from the next 11? Okay. Which is also interesting. So everybody's probably from the mature markets. But the BRICS and the next 11, so Asia, Latin America, Africa, Middle East, and Central Eastern Europe, account for about 30% of our business. Target is to get them to 35 to 40. Digital, by digital I mean computer-driven, PC-driven, I mean mobile-driven, video-driven, display-driven, social network-driven, etc. Search-driven. Again, around, by accident, about 30%. So you could say around 5 to 6 billion, depending what definition of revenue you took, is in those two areas. They are not incremental. You can't then say, one of our competitors adds the digital to the fast growth and says, well, we've got, in our case, it would be 10 or 11 or 12 billion dollars in the fast growth. That's garbage. Because you have crossover. So you have digital in China. So you'd be in both categories. And there's a crossover probably of around 12 or 15%. So it's not 60 if you add the percentages of the fast growth. It's probably getting on to about 45%, 50% of the business. So those are the first two objectives. Consumer insight is about understanding more what consumers are doing, which post-Lehman, I think, the high-end consumer actually hasn't changed his or her behavior pattern very much, actually. Somewhat surprisingly. I mean, I was in Geneva and I went before we had our top-to-top with Nestle, which is one of our biggest clients, and I saw the guy who runs Hugo, the watches, which is 30,000 watches. It's part of LVMH. And he was telling me that last year, he had a record year last year and continues to do so. So luxury, whether it's Prada, Gucci, Burberry, whatever it is, luxury has been relatively unaffected. The rich and the inequality issues are the issues that people go on about, and maybe rightly, maybe wrongly. The rich continue to be spenders. What's happened is the middle income and lower income categories have been affected by Lehman, the post-Lehman recession, and they become much more price and quality conscious, or price-value relationship conscious. The interesting thing about Lehman, though, I think, is not in the consumer categories, it's in the corporates. Corporates are not the same as they've ever been. They are much more cost-conscious. They've lived for 20 years in a relatively inflation-free environment, certainly at the consumer level. They've had very little pricing power. When Rubin and Greenspan were running the US economy and therefore the world in the 1990s, there was very little inflation. We've had inflation subsequently in commodity prices, but very little leverage with the consumer, particularly with 8 to 9% unemployment in mature economies. Retailers having power, putting pressure on the manufacturers. So they get caught, the manufacturers get caught between commodity prices increases and not having pricing power, margins coming under pressure, so they put their suppliers, such as us, under pressure to this sort of a referred pain that happens there, and they're very much more cost and quality conscious. So procurement comes to the fore, finance comes to the fore, much more than marketing, which I think is not the right thing. But in most companies, marketing now is playing second fiddle to finance and procurement. So understanding how the consumers are changing, and that's 4 billion out of our 16 billion, 4 billion out of our 19 billion include associates. excuse me, it comes from market research, consumer insight. And when we talk about consumer insight, we talk about two other things as well: data analytics, or some people now call big data, which is the big advance, and also the application of technology to our business. And you may have seen yesterday, we announced a big partnership with Microsoft, which actually happens to be one of our largest clients. And what we're doing there is we have a new media inventory platform called Xaxis, which actually launched in the BRICS in Asia Pacific a few days ago, so now it's worldwide. And that relationship with Microsoft enables us to exclusively buy inventory for that line platform. So, new markets, new media, market research, which is, say, 25% of our business. If you add the digital to the market research, it's about half our business, so quantifiable things are about half the revenues. And I said horizontality. That is getting our business, even in our businesses, there are 158,000 people. We have in 108 countries. We added Myanmar this week. You may have seen that we took. We bought back effectively a company that we had to sell because of the problems and sanctions around Burma. Thankfully, the US and the UK governments have now relaxed the sanctions, and we were the first in, just like we were in Vietnam, post the Vietnamese War, when actually American companies had a tough time because of the restrictions on US companies, whereas UK-based companies had an easier time to get into Vietnam. So Myanmar is a very good example. 108 countries, 158,000 people. There are 60 people in Rangoon, and Myanmar is, just remind you, 66 million people. So it's not very unusual to find a market that sort of falls in from the sky, if you can put it like that, or opens up literally in a very short period of time that has 66 million people. It's the same size as the UK. So Bags of Promise in Rangoon has a strong culture, strong history, and that will be, in my view, Vietnam's about 85, 86 million. Vietnam stuttered. It had its early 90s growth, but in the recession of 97 it came back, the Asian recession of 97, but then it had another decent energy. So that's the horizontality, is to get those 158,000 people not to work in verticals or silos, but to work together. Two responses horizontally. One is client leaders, so our top 30 clients, which are 5.5 billion of our revenues. We have a client leader for every one of our clients who is working across the whole. So Ford, our biggest client, Procter, our second biggest, Unilever, our third biggest. We have somebody who's responsible for driving the whole of that account across WPP. And at a country level, we have country managers who have no authority across the matrix, but they have the responsibility for finding good people locally, for finding good acquisitions locally, and identifying the companies of the future. You know, the chaebols of the future, or the automobile factories, the automobile leaders from China or India, or indeed from Brazil, or wherever it's going to be. So, and the reason for that is, if you know you're responsible for 108 countries, and you sit in London or New York, you can't expect to know locally what goes on. So we have local knowledge as well. So that's the strategy. Now let me just say, that's 5 to 6 minutes worth. Let me just sort of switch to the BRICS very quickly, because that was what I was asked to talk a little bit about. So if I look at our BRICS, so 158,000 people. We have in the BRICS, defined as Brazil, Russia, India, and China. If my memory serves me right, we have 34,000 people, roughly. And just as a point of reference, we have 24,000 in the US, and we have I think it's 14,000 in the UK. So the BRICS are getting up to where the UK will be.